Hello, folks, and welcome to The Farm, a podcast dedicated to culture, parapolitics, and high weirdness in all its many forms. This is your host, Recluse, aka Stephen Snyder, the longtime curator of the Visa blog and author of the recently released A Special Relationship Trump Epstein and the Secret History of the Anglo American Establishment. If you like what you hear here today, be sure to check me out at visupview.blogspot.com. That's visupview.blogspot.com, and procure a copy of that book and my other works at the Farm's official store, which is at thefarmpodcast.store. That is the Farm Podcast, all one word, .store. Also, please consider signing up for the Farm's Patreon. You get 2 additional full-length shows per month. That's between 3 and 4 hours of bonus material with exclusive gifts and content. All right, folks, today's guest practically needs no introduction as he is a reoccurring character around these parts. He is the great John Brisson of We've Read the Documents. John, thank you so much for dropping by again today, sir.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Recluse, here on the farm, brother. Glad to be back again.
All right, sir. Today's show is a timely one. We are going to talk about the enigmatic Atlantic Council, one of the most powerful think tanks that you've never heard of. The few who have chronicled it have accused it of being a new Bilderberg group. But are these claims credible? That's what we're here to find out, as well as the council's designs for the Biden administration going forward. And we've got one of the best parapolitical researchers in the business to help us navigate these chaotic waters. So let's have at it. Okay, John, an obvious place to start, as with most things, is the beginning. So what are the origins of the council?
All right, so the origins of the Atlantic Council, and I watched a video that the Atlantic Council had put forward discussing their history, and they talk about it was a pivotal year of 1961, which was when the Atlantic Council was formed, and it was a successor group to the Atlantic Union Committee. So the reason why they say it was pivotal during that time period in 1961 was because you had the young president John Fitzgerald Kennedy becoming, president of these United States of America, which many people, both on the right and the left, were concerned about Kennedy, of whether or not he was their guy, even though I do think a lot of that is political theater at this point, that of course JFK was working for the world order, obviously. But they at least appeared the illusion that they were worried. Eventually you have the John Birch Society with the Hunts, and we'll get to the Hunts maybe a little bit later, possibly playing a major role in Kennedy's assassination. So it was Kennedy taking the realm of being the commander in chief, so to say, of the largest power in the world when we were still in the midst of the Cold War. You know what I mean, Recluse? So everybody was worried about that. They wanted a strengthened Atlantic, a strengthened West to go against the East, which the East at that time was the big bear, was the USSR, communist Russia. So it was the Atlantic Council was promoting NATO and European American cooperation. It was some of the people that were founding at the time was former Secretary of State Dean Acheson, who was heading up Kennedy's NATO task force at the time. William C. Foster, the head of the American Committee for Atlantic Institute and the treasurer for the organization. Adolf Schmidt, an officer of T. Mellons and Sons, and former Secretary of State Christian A. Herter, the head of the newly formed, who was the head of the newly formed Atlantic Council at that time. And so pretty much the organization started as a think tank to influence policy, to maintain a strong American, Europe, Western control, where they kind of felt like that NATO wasn't doing a good enough job. And they wanted also to include countries like Japan as well, which they considered to be a Western country, even though it's across the Pacific Ocean, obviously, but they found it to be an important area while keeping, Russia and China and North Korea at bay. They'll still, work hard with Japan even today. So the council, Atlantic Council during the 1960s would produce series of reports on the state of public opinion towards alliance member countries. It sought to actively educate the public about the need for engagement in international affairs through television commercials, starring the famous comedian Bob Hope, an academic journal, and a newsletter. So they were busy trying to drum up public support for the West, for the Europe and America. And it seems like they pretty much succeeded a lot in that front, especially later when we discuss some of the members or people who have spoken to the Atlantic Council may have been people who are at least appear to be pro-West and staunch anti-communist.
So it's interesting that they tried to bring Japan in at like the beginning, right? Like the early 60s.
Yeah, but it wasn't until around, I think, the 70s when Japan started to take focus on the Atlantic Council. And they have a branch of the Atlantic Council now called Atlantic Council Asia.
It's kind of interesting though, because it prefigures the Bilderberg, or no, excuse me, the Trilateral Commission and kind of their designs to also bring Japan more forward in the international community in the mid 1970s.
Yes, it was because it was one of the first major think tanks that tried to bring Japan forward.
And it's interesting too. You say Dean, was it Atkinson?
Yes.
Had such a major role in it. I mean, of course, he was one of the wise men figures. The kind of group of elder statesmen who had centered around the State Department and the Department of Defense beginning around the Second World War. There were some interesting characters involved in that. Of course, there was also George Kennan, certainly a guy that we'll probably discuss here in a little bit. I believe Averill Harriman was another one of them, Skull and Bonesman as well.
I mean, technically, this think tank came out of the signing of the North Atlantic Treaty, which NATO was later, founded from. So pretty much, this was the major group or major think tank to run allied with NATO.
Well, it makes sense in the context of Atkinson because, I mean, he was really the, one of the major figures behind the policy of containment. This was really like their whole baby. So, yeah, I mean, it would make sense that he would be the lead on a think tank that seems specifically designed, at least in the early years, to really uphold the NATO/Atlantic Alliance.
Yeah, and it seems that they're majorly pushing the Cold War narrative because they talked about the building of the Berlin Wall also started in 1961. And
oh yeah, that's a good point too.
Yeah, so they were like, if you go watch the video the Atlantic Council put out,
the missile crisis too, right?
Yeah, they were really big about just talking about why it was important that they were founded specifically in 1961 because the world was so much in turmoil at the time.
Yeah,
and they were fighting the major communist threat of the USSR. They also mentioned the Bay of Pigs too as well, which happened in April. I think it was April 17th, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, so April 17th, they also discussed the Bay of Pigs too as well, debacle too.
Well, there was also too, some issues with the just generally the European alliances at the time. Of course, there had been the recent coup attempt, I believe, against de Gaulle and France in '61, if I'm not mistaken, which led to the creation of the OAS, and then the special relationship with the UK was not great at this point in time either. This was about 5 years removed from the Suez crisis, and the Brits were still smarting over that one a little bit as well. So, as were the French.
So it seemed like the Atlantic Council was a way to push Western, European, American global policy. And we'll talk about later how it morphed in some sort of kind of globalist neocon type organization. But during this time period, I would actually ally them a lot with the right world order in a lot of ways. We'll discuss more about that later.
Well, kind of, again, because, with the wise man clique, I argued in my book, A Special Relationship, they were really sort of like maybe not necessarily the genesis, but they were part of the line, essentially, of succession to the modern neocons. Really, you can kind of go back to the foreign policy advocated by some of the figures around Theodore Roosevelt, on to the wise men in World War II, and then finally on to kind of the emergence of the neocons in the late 70s, early 80s. Sometimes these guys call themselves Democrats, sometimes they call themselves Republicans, but they've always kind of been behind this peculiar form of imperialism.
Yeah, and the Atlantic Council calls itself a centrist think tank, and it is a major think tank on the world stage because, as we're going to discuss, you'll have many players on the right and the left who are involved in Atlantic Council. So it's interesting to see how I think the Atlantic Council is probably above like the Council for National Policy or the Council on Foreign Relations. You'll have players on both sides from both of those groups join the Atlantic Council, which I think is on par with the Bilderberg Group or La Circle, kind of like a parallel structure of how the organizations go up, as a pyramid, I would assume.
It's
But yeah,
It kind of reminds me a bit of what is it? The Center for Strategic and International Studies, I think.
yes, that would also be another one that combined both the right and the
Yeah,
left.
yeah, yeah. All right. Well, I think we've given you guys enough context then for the emergence of the Atlantic Council. So, all right. So it didn't seem though like it really emerged as a major body, a major player until the early 21st century. Do you have any idea what led to its rise?
From what I saw, it was because after the War on Terror, and in the video they talk about how after the beginning of the War on Terror, even toward what was going on and after, they had to pivot because there was no more threat from the USSR anymore. Of course, the Soviet Union had fallen and was replaced by Russia. So now the threat would be terrorism, global terrorism. So they kind of had to pivot to more, fighting that boogeyman. And of course, modern day now, China. Not to say that the Communist Chinese Party or China isn't a threat to the status of the United States. They are, but it's who they're choosing to put their attention towards. But of course, not in a what you and I would argue is a legitimate way, or or legitimate reasons why they should have their attention, towards to China. But we'll discuss that more later. But it's also Frederick Kemp, who's the chief executive of Atlantic Council. He talked about how at least 25 countries since 2008 started heavily donating to the Atlantic Council. So it seemed that they started getting a lot of powerful funding from not only the European countries or the United States or Japan, but also from Arabic countries too, in the Middle East as well. So it seems like a whole bunch of powerful entities and powerful countries decided to just start pumping money into the Atlantic Council, which they really hadn't since towards the end of the Cold War in the 80s, in the late 80s. The Atlantic Council kind of went dormant during the 90s. I mean, I'm not saying that there weren't things going on, but they weren't a major player on the world stage as much as they were during the 80s and as much as they definitely are today. So it seems like they just revived it. They just pulled it out and started giving the Atlantic Council a whole bunch of money. So you had money coming in from Europe, you had money coming in for the Middle East, you had money coming in from Japan, from the United States. And in doing so, the Atlantic Council started to gain a lot more prominence, and you started to have major power players join the Atlantic Council, like Henry Kissinger. So yeah, it just seems like that was the time during the 2000s, during the War on Terror, for the Atlantic Council to rise, and they were one of the biggest backers of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which there was a lot of lobbying for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, with Japan and other Asian countries. And in a way, I've gone back and forth on the TPP, right? When I used to be a Trump supporter, I thought the Trans-Pacific Partnership was a very bad idea, because that's what I was taught and sold, that I was going to be like another NAFTA. But in reality, now circling back, and I'm still not thinking it's the best thing in the world, but I'm not going to say it's the worst either, because the Trans-Pacific Partnership, with us, partnering with many different Pacific countries in Japan against China, it would have been an economic war against China. So I don't know. I mean, how do you feel about that, Recluse, about the TPP? And I mean, Atlantic Council's pushing and Obama's pushing it, so I should be concerned, right? right?
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting thing, and I mean I think it's certainly more in keeping with the neoliberal order, and I mean their general policy of trying to use I mean this kind of economic attack, essentially in lieu of actual bullets and tanks and so forth. So and I mean, certainly, I know you and I have discussed this before, but when you see what China has done with the Belt and Road Initiative, certainly, I mean, the TTP might have been a decent counterbalance to that in a crucial area of the world. Again, it's a complicated situation. In hindsight, the TPP might be slightly better than the current state of affairs. But I mean, on the flip side of the coin, with the people pushing it in the Atlantic Council and what have you, it's not going to be designed to help normal people. Let's just leave it at that.
No, no. I mean, didn't majority of these people sell our technology through the Belt and Road Initiative to Russia, China, and Israel? Didn't they sell us out
Mm.
already decades ago? So now what? Now they're going to put economic pressure on China through the TPP, something they've already set up to begin with. It's just like no matter what happens, we lose, right?
Yeah,
Doesn't
yeah.
matter.
All right. So now, as I alluded to in the intro, the Atlantic Council has a reputation as being the new Bilderberg group. Where does that come from? I mean, and is it accurate?
Conspiracy cultures, talking heads, talking heads in the alternative truth movement. I mean, I've said it. I think it is. I think that too many people were going down to Bilderberg group meetings and having cameras out there and watching the Bilderbergers come out of the meeting, right? I mean, and in the conspiracy culture, even popular, not popular culture, even basic, standard culture. Most people know what the Bilderberg group is at this point, or at least have heard of it. You know what I mean? I mean, if this was like 10 years ago, when I started to, wake up to the truth or a truth, or just wake up to the world order, I guess is probably a better term. I used to talk about Bilderberg group and people think you're crazy, I mean, when my dad mentioned it and to me in the early 90s and late 90s, I didn't, I know what he was talking about. I never heard of it, and imagine, if everybody thought I was crazy mentioning it, all my friends then, imagine what they thought, people thought of him. So it's like a shell game, Like I'm not saying the Bilderberg group isn't powerful, but at this point, since we're always, people are always going and covering it, and look who's coming out of the Bilderberg meetings and getting a membership list of who's part of the Bilderberg group and all their connections and all the alternative media, which a lot of it is a limited hangout covering Bilderberg meetings and everything, and they're not secret anymore. So they move it to Atlantic Council, which is more open to some degree. I mean, they publish their membership lists and they have a YouTube channel and they publish a lot of their meetings or people speaking at their meetings and stuff like that and panels and everything. But at this point, few people are paying attention to it in alternative media. I mean, you hear maybe some right-wing pundits like Dan Bongino maybe discuss about the Atlantic Council, right? But like most, people in the truth movement, and they probably have maybe scantily heard of it, but no one's really covering it in depth that I've seen. I mean, Kevin Marsden has some on my channel. I've discussed the Atlantic Council when I come across them. But I do think that they are the new Bilderberg group. I think that they have moved a lot of their clandestine work between both sides of the world order to the Atlantic Council. So, I mean, what do you think about it? You think you think that's true, or do you think that's, do you think the Bilderberg group still has more significant power?
No, I definitely think the Bilderberg group has declined a lot over the last decade or two. I mean, like you said, it's practically, or not, I mean, practically a household name, but I mean, it's certainly a brand name within conspiratainment at this point. The Atlantic Council, I mean, it's managed to fly under a lot of people's radars, for many years now. And like you said, I mean, it is kind of clever how they do it. I mean, there is more openness to it than, I mean, there was with Bilderberg. I suppose in that sense, it's maybe a little closer to how the Council on Foreign Relations has historically been run. But yeah, and this flip side of the coin, though, people don't really seem to notice the pipeline that they've established between the Atlantic Council and the White House over the last, 15 years or so.
Yes, yes, at least since the George W. Bush administration.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely seems like at this point, the Atlantic Council is the institution that's grooming a lot of the neoliberal foreign policy establishment at this point, which we'll get to here in a minute. But before we go there, let's get into another aspect of the Atlantic Council that's very interesting that we've been alluding to. Obviously it's closely associated with the neoliberal order, but there are links to the secret right as well. You've seen some interesting Council for National Policy links to the Atlantic Council, right, John?
Yes, I have. Now this is only because I know the CMP membership list for the most part in and out, right? Inside and out. So I can recognize names when I see them and go, oh, that person spoke to the CMP or that person was a CMP member, But yes, so first we have someone who shocked me, and this is when I first really started paying attention to Atlantic Council, and that was Hunter Hunt, who's on the International Advisory Board of Atlantic Council, and H.L. Hunt, who was a founder of the Council for National Policy, and it was his. I'm not H.L. Hunt. I'm sorry, Nelson Bunker Hunt, who is Hunter Hunt's uncle, and H.L. Hunt was Hunter Hunt's grandfather, and Ray Hunt was his father. But the notorious Hunt family were financiers of the John Birch Society and the Council for National Policy. And so it was very interesting to see that Hunter Hunt would be in such a globalist think tank. Huh. Wouldn't expect that. Wouldn't expect that.
It's interesting too. I mean, because his dad, Ray Lee Hunt, was arguably the most powerful Hunt. Of his generation. I mean, he ended up on what was it, the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, I think, or something like that, during the Bush 2 years. And what was it? Essentially, W just gave him like 30 or 40% of the oil in Kuwait or something like that. It was just, like, Ray, I want you to have these oil fields. I've never been able to forgive myself for what Libya did to you. But yeah, that was, probably much closer to the truth than we would really like to acknowledge, quite frankly.
Yeah, that was a great impression, and it was probably what happened. I'm going to go ahead and say that's what happened if I was a fly on the wall. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, so you have Hunter Hunt. You have John Bolton, old mustache himself. He's been on Atlantic Council panels and has looked on very favorably by the Atlantic Council. Of course, John Bolton was both a member of the CMP and the Council on Foreign Relations. So I call him a twofer. Usually people who've been on both or go back and forth on both, they tend to be higher up in the world order, in my opinion, instead of you're just dedicated to one. If they allow you to go back and forth, there's something up with you. All right. You're a kingmaker to some degree. Okay. Ronald Reagan addressed the Atlantic Council on June 13th, 1988, about building relations between the East and West and hopefully foretelling the future fall of the USSR. Of course, Ronald Reagan was a CMP member. He got some of his Iran-Contra briefings directly from the CMP meetings with Oliver North. And he spoke to the 10th anniversary of the Council for National Policy. And he spoke to the CMP while he was president, at least twice. So then you had Jeannie Kirkpatrick, who was the ambassador to the United Nations under the Reagan administration. She addressed the Atlantic Council on June the 17th, 1988, as well, discussing the same. And you can actually find her speech at Atlantic Council on C-SPAN, and I'll listen to some of it. And you can actually find Ronald Reagan's address at Atlantic Council typed out on his in the Reagan Ronald Reagan Library website. So it's interesting if you guys want to go check out. I mean, pretty much what they talked about is the power of the United States over the USSR, right? Obviously, Ted Cruz, I was shocked to find, actually addressed the Atlantic Council about oil pipelines. Of course, Ted Cruz spoke to the CMP when he gave his presidential stump speech in 2015, as well as some of the members of the Council for National Policy wanted Ted Cruz to actually run 2016 over Donald Trump. Now, I don't know if Rupert Murdoch is a Council for National Policy member, or I don't have any proof that he's spoken to the CNP. However, I would say with great confidence it's likely that he's attended at least one CNP meeting. But Rupert Murdoch is also a member of the International Advisory Board of the Atlantic Council. So those are some CNP connections right there. You also have Mike Pompeo addressed the Atlantic Council. Now his I have to get her name. Hold on. There's one major. Let me see. She was the ambassador to the Holy See.
Ooh.
Mary Ann Glendon. She's a long-term Council for National Policy member. She was United States ambassador to the Holy See under the George W. Bush administration. She is Pompeo's mentor, and Pompeo gushes about her all the time, every chance he gets.
Interesting. I wanted to clarify on that too. It was actually the oil from quote unquote Kurdistan.
Oh, Kurdistan, okay.
That George W. Bush gave to Ray Lee Hunt. So yes, they also created a essentially fictitious country to give the oil to him with. So anyway, but yeah, that's kind of how the Hunts roll. All right. So how about Lesuc-Howe? There is some interesting overlap there between figures like Henry Kissinger and good old Chuck Hagel, right, John?
Yes. So Henry Kissinger and Chuck Hagel are both been outed as Law Circle members. Of course, Chuck Hagel, he was United States Secretary of Defense over Barack Obama. He was a United States Senator from Nebraska. He's a Republican. I don't know if he was in the CNP or not. I haven't found any proof of him being on any membership list. But both him and one of the most evil men who ever walked the face of this earth, Henry Kissinger, were both members of the Atlantic Council. Like I mentioned, Jeannie Kirkpatrick earlier, she addressed the Atlantic Council. She's also a member of La Circle. John Negroponte addressed the Atlantic Council in 2017 in a panel on Trump's 100 days. And Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was a member of La Circle, has spoken to the Atlantic Council, was likely a member of the Atlantic Council. His son, Ian Brzezinski, is a resident senior fellow in the Atlantic Council's Brent Scowcroft Center on International Security. So yes, there are ties of La Circle directly to the Atlantic Council. And there's probably more. The issue is we don't, there's not a lot of information. We thank God we have David Teacher's book, Rogue Agents, which is and so many pages, but we don't have we have way more membership lists for the Council for National Policy directly than we do for La Circle.
Yeah.
So
you really got to give a good big shout out to Joel from the Institute for the Study of Globalization and Covert Politics. I mean, he's really the one who's gotten most of the more recent membership list for Lesuc-Howe. So yeah, thank you very much for that service, John.
Yes, very much so. Yes, thank you very much.
All right. So the Obama administration represented a kind of coming out party for the Atlantic Council. Can you go over the litany of ties between the Obama administration and the council?
You got a minute?
Sure.
I got quite a few people to go through. So first we have Richard Holbrooke, who was United States Special Envoy for Afghanistan and Pakistan during the Obama administration to his death in 2010. Next, we have Susan Rice, who's at least addressed the Atlantic Council, but she was United States National Security Advisor under Barack Obama and United States Ambassador to the United Nations under Barack Obama. We have John Huntsman Jr., the Utah governor and Mormon.
I was going to say that's a code word for Mormon.
Yes, who was the United States ambassador to China during Obama and the United States ambassador to Russia under Donald Trump. We have Michael Hayden, who was the director of Central Intelligence Agency, the second director of the CIA, under Barack Hussein Obama. We have Richard Morningstar, who was the United States ambassador to Azerbaijan under the Obama administration and the special envoy for Eurasian energy under Barack Obama. We have David Petraeus, who replaced, if I remember correctly, Stanley McChrystal as the commander of the International Security Assistance Force.
That's correct.
And then under Obama was the fourth director of the CIA. We have Chuck Hagel, who I mentioned earlier, United States Secretary of Defense under Barack Obama, and chair of the President's Intelligence Advisory Board under Barack Obama. James L. Jones, United States National Security Advisor under Barack Obama. Amos Hochstein, United States Special Envoy and Coordinator for International Energy Affairs under Barack Obama. Now, Hochstein, I've discussed this in the episode that we did with Moss on Ukraine, has quite interesting ties between what gas company that was in Ukraine. I probably have to think about it later, but you go back and listen to the episodes, connections between Ukraine, Hunter Biden, and Hochstein. And Hochstein now is advising the Atlantic Council on energy. So it's quite interesting. He's on the board of the Atlantic Council too as well. So yeah, it looks like he has continued. Now I remember, it's Naftagaz. Naftagaz is what he was. He's former member of the supervisory board of Naftagaz. He resigned in October 2020 and went to work for the Atlantic Council as Atlantic Council as a energy advisor full time after that. So I got Leon Panetta, who was the United States Secretary of Defense under Barack Obama and the third director of the Central Intelligence Agency under Barack Obama. And you have Ash Carter, who is the United States Secretary of Defense under Barack Obama, and the United States Deputy Secretary of Defense under Barack Obama, and the Undersecretary for Defense of Acquisition Technology and Logistics under Obama. So there were many Atlantic Council members who were a major part of, you had CIA directors, you had Secretary of Defenses that were for Obama during the Obama administration. So that's quite a list of people. Recluse.
Yeah, I mean, what seems like specifically, I mean, a lot of it was geared towards foreign policy. I mean, a lot of people familiar with the Pentagon, the CIA, the State Department, and even, some of the other ones not directly related to foreign policy, like the energy, connections. I mean, those, again, are, ultimately a part of foreign policy. So,
yes.
Yes.
And I want to mention that John Kerry, who was Secretary of State under Barack Obama, he also someone I left out. He's also addressed the Atlantic Council multiple times and discussed climate change too as well. So,
well, John Kerry, though, I think has discussed climate change with damn near everybody on the face of the earth at this point in those circles. So I mean,
that is true, but Kerry definitely is a sleaze bag.
Yeah, though there's no dispute. He's certainly one of the more despicable professional politicians, and that's saying something. All right. So at one point, the Atlantic Council brought on someone affiliated with the Call of Duty games. Can you get into that for us a bit, please?
Well, actually, we got two people, Recluse.
Oh, really?
So the first person is General James L. Jones, who's the co-chairman of the Call of Duty Endowment Fund. That was put forth by Activision.
That was fabulous. By the way, Call of Duty. Now, I don't really know anything about games, so forgive me. But that was it was like a link to Tom Clancy, right?
No.
Okay.
Not Call of Duty games. You're talking about the division and the Tom Clancy games like Splinter Cell and stuff like that and everything. No,
I
Call of
wonder if
Duty.
there's like the kind of secret right neoliberal divide in those freaking games, man.
I hate to tell you, but I've played a lot of Call of Duty games throughout my life. I'm ashamed to say that, but it is what it is. All right, but but yes, so that's one tie-in. Of course, James L. Jones is the former chairman of the Atlantic Council, is still a big part of the Atlantic Council today. And of course, I interviewed Private First Class Burgee, and say what you said with his connections to Tor Linderman or Millennial Millie. There are a lot of things that I can back up that Burgee has said. And yes, he's a Trump supporter. God help him. But there are a lot of things that he said in my interview and interviews that I've heard him in, separate from being around that cast of characters, which I really believe they're just there to paint him in a bad light, of the connections between Dynology and James Jones and McChrystal, and kind of like, what later became psychographical and psychological warfare on the American people that they used on ISIS first. That would, be a big part of Psy Group and Cambridge Analytica and Defeat Disinfo and everything. But you want to know more about James L. Jones, definitely go listen. There's two streams I did on it. One with Private First Class Burgee, another with Kevin Marsden about the Shadowgate Nexus. So there's a lot of information about James L. Jones, and James L. Jones was talked about a lot in Michael Hastings' book, the the Operators, and also James L. Jones' relationship, if I remember correctly, to John McCain, right? James L. Jones and John McCain were really good buddies, right, Recluse?
I believe so.
I think so. I think they talked about that a lot about that in the book. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I actually need to go back and listen to it a second time. But yes, I think yes. So, but yes, that's the first person is, they're part of James L. Jones, the co-chairman of the Call of Duty Endowment Fund. The second person is a gentleman named Dave Anthony, who is a director and writer for the Call of Duty series. And he managed a development team at Activision, and he was like a major part of the Call of Duty franchise. And he left to work directly for the Atlantic Council, and I found that highly interesting. Kind of like the James L. Jones connection. You're kind of like shrugging your shoulders, and you're like, yeah, whatever. But this guy. Also, what I found very interesting is he convinced Oliver North to consult for the Call of Duty games, so Oliver North could kind of give him some information about the military, so they could base their Call of Duty games more accurately on the military. So, Anthony's got direct connections to Oliver North. He is an Atlantic Council fellow now. He's, he said he created a presentation that juxtaposed footage from 2008 terrorist attacks on Mumbai with images of Las Vegas, suggests how easy it would be for terrorists to buy assault rifles, walk into a casino, and slaughter everybody. Hopes this will speak to people in Washington a different way they're used to being spoken to, a very emotional and gripping way. That's what a lot of the Call of Duty games were putting forth the narrative of global terror and forever wars. Like a neocon's wet dream. A lot of the story modes. I mean, I mainly played the multiplayer in the Call of Duty games. I didn't play the story modes. I know there's one of the games where you had to like shoot innocents in a Russian airport. I don't remember much more than that, but I remember being very graphic and people being upset. It was Modern Warfare 2. It was the No Russian mission. So you don't have to shoot anybody if you want to. If you can, you can just start mowing down people in an airport if you so choose, in Moscow. So yeah, I mean the games were very cinematic, so they take they kind of take that propaganda that was used in the video games and start showing it to members of the Atlantic Council and to the United States public. So that's a good thing. It's a good thing, right? It's cool.
Oh yeah, wonderful. And yeah, it looks like he did know McCain for a while. In fact, I believe McCain was his first commanding officer back in the 70s. Apparently, yeah, he was also quite close to Hillary Clinton as well.
Yes, he was. That's yes. Private first class Burgee talked a lot about that. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, they all know each other to some degree, right? And when you're that high up, James L. Jones is no slouch. So.
I'm not sure, but I think he had actually clashed a little bit with Gates over the foreign policy in Afghanistan initially, but I don't quote me on that though. I can't remember exactly on that.
I'm trying to remember if there's anything else as far as Jones is concerned. Not that I can think of.
And who was the other guy, I believe?
The guy that was part of the Call of Duty that I just mentioned earlier, Dave Anthony.
Okay. All right. So let's see. All right. So how about Trump? Presumably there weren't as close of ties with the orange one, right?
No, there are. More than I thought when I started looking.
So what were they?
Not as many as Obama, but there were. So we have Tom Bossert. He was 7th United States Homeland Security Advisor under Donald Trump. He resigned on July 27, 2017, when John Bolton started his term as National Security Advisor. On July 20th, 2017, Bossert called for a comprehensive biodefense strategy against devastating pandemics and intentional attacks. Recluse. He's a distinguished fellow, and he's part of the Scrowcraft Center for Strategy and Security, and been a member since 2008. So, our guy.
Good old Scrowcraft.
H.R. McMaster, United States National Security Advisor under Trump, that replaced Michael Flynn. McMaster has addressed the Atlantic Council. James Mattis, honorary director of the Atlantic Council, former United States Secretary of Defense under Trump. Mark Esper briefed the Atlantic Council frequently, even briefed the Atlantic Council when he was Secretary of Defense under Trump. The Atlantic Council's also hosted numerous times the so-called white hat general from the old Nasara Gassara 1990s days, which I'm surprised they didn't try to revive him for the QAnon operation. That would be General Joseph Dunford.
Good old Dunford.
And of course, I'm saying that in jest. Okay, like the guy's not for us, obviously.
I know.
He's got to be the head. He's got to be the head of some operations, because his name always comes up as a white hat general for us. So I don't know why they keep picking him, Recluse. There's got to be something to. He's got to be part of something. All right, something's down the ride. Joseph Dunford's part of these psychological operations somehow.
Yeah. So. Just the fact that he keeps coming up again and again. But yeah, it's fascinating to see the pipeline the Atlantic Council has to the Pentagon.
Yes, very much so. John Bolton.
Yeah.
I mean, he was part of the Atlantic Council's Commander Series, Atlantic Council's flagship speakers forum for senior military and defense leaders, looked on favorably by the council. Robert McFarland, remember from around Contra days, is also part of the Commander Series. Mike Pompeo addressed the Atlantic Council, and John W. Raymond, commander of the Space Command, appointed by Trump. He's part of the Atlantic Council's Commander Series also. Recluse.
Oh, you got to have the Space Command represented somewhere, I suppose.
Of course. I mean, got space lasers and Star Wars and all that, right? Star Wars really happened, right?
Oh, yes.
It wasn't just high frontier hijinks with Council for National Policy member Lieutenant General Daniel O. Graham with Elizabeth Clare Prophet and Craig J. Spence and all that. It wasn't just that, right? It was really death lasers in space.
Yes, and there were definitely Space Brothers and, Ascended Masters there with them as well.
Okay, just like when they did the Masonic rituals on the moon. When which astronaut
brought out
Armstrong? Was it Neil Armstrong? Was he the one who brought out the Masonic flag?
I can't remember. I think it was Aldrin.
It might have been Aldrin who brought out the Masonic flag in the apron. So that's if we went to the moon. So no, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're good. So yeah. There's always that kind of thing. Oh my goodness. All right. So, what was the role the Atlantic Council played in spreading the Russiagate narrative?
All right, now this one was big. So the Atlantic Council, through the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security, they put out a major paper in September 2018 called "Defining Russian Election Interference: An Analysis of Select 2014 and 2018 Cyber-Enabled Incidents." And I remember the right news media, the CNP news media, just losing their everlasting mind about this publication. Okay, and you also had members like R. James Woolsey, a member of the Atlantic Council. He was out there um, pushing narratives too as well. So I mean, it you just had many members of the Atlantic Council pushing the Russian election interference, especially of the 2016 election of Donald John Trump. Not to say that Russia wasn't involved. They were, but both sides of the world order, both the right and the left, have their own sellouts to Russia. To act like Hillary Clinton his hands are completely clean to Russia, as the Atlantic Council does, and try to paint exactly that it's all Donald Trump's connections to Russia, which are just as numerous. I mean, Hillary Clinton, I mean, you have Skokovo with Victor Vekselberg, and even Biden going over to Skokovo and then pretty much facilitating the transfer of modern technology to Russia's Silicon Valley. It's just to say that neither one, it's pretty much to show, I think the Atlantic Council's report and many Atlantic Council speakers, writing numerous op-eds about pushing the 2016 election to have massive, Russian cyber-enabled incidents, as they say, a Russian election interference. Not to say that it didn't exist, but they're not the only guilty party, okay? And it's not like we haven't interfered in other elections either. Not to excuse what Russia did, but I'm just saying you gotta talk about, you gotta discuss these things. They're trying to paint it all on Trump and his cohorts and the right wing of the world order by saying that the left wing, whether it's Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, or the Biden family, have no connections to Russia at all. It's kind of sad. It's kind of sad in a lot of ways, especially and am I missing something here? I mean, that's all I really saw from what I could tell. What I could tell, Recluse, was that they were just seemed to be they would also put what's his name? There was another guy that they would put out there to try to find him. There was another name, a person they would put out there that they would try to push the narrative about the Russia Gate. I have to find the person. But what do you think? What do you think about? What I mean, why do you think the Atlantic Council would only singly push the narrative that the right part of the world order, or that Trump specifically, is in bed with Russia, and to leave out Clinton or Biden or anybody else on the left side of the world order, the globalist world order, when both sides make up the Atlantic Council? It seemed like they were primarily, because like the CNP pretty much denies that Trump has any connections with Russia and just pushes Clinton, if any, or specifically Biden. So it seems like the Atlantic Council is doing the reverse in a lot of ways.
I was gonna say it's interesting because it seems like Michael Flynn would have been one of the guys who would have taken the biggest, or one of the biggest beatings from a lot of the Russiagate narratives being pushed by the Atlantic Council. And when you look at, like we were just kind of talking about the pipeline that the Atlantic Council seems to have to crucial positions, in the American national security establishment, with the Pentagon, with the National Security Advisor post. Flynn, was not a part of the Atlantic Council. And for whatever reason, it's
No,
like a lot of people, I don't really totally understand it, but a lot of them seem to have a real problem with Flynn being a national security advisor. It might have just been partly because of his background. I mean, he really had no, significant links to the, kind of foreign policy establishment through that, think tank, circle, clique, whatever you want to call it.
And the person I wanted to remember before I forgot was General Michael V. Hayden, and who was a former CIA director. He made remarks at StratCom 2018 at the Atlantic Council Global Forum on Strategic Communications and Digital Disinformation directly about Russia's interference in the 2016 election. That's who I was trying to remember.
But yeah, it seems like for whatever reason, they really did not want Flynn in that NSA post. But again,
That's not saying Flynn's our guy or anything. It's just
yeah. It's just it's just strange, But anyway, okay. So, what kind of role did you see the Atlantic Council playing in the 2020 election?
The biggest thing I saw was something I wanted to mention, but I held myself back was that they completely downplayed any Russian interference in the 2020 election.
That's interesting. Out of curiosity, were there any links to the Atlantic Council and the what is it, the World Economic Forum, I think, in their warnings about cyber attacks or something to that effect?
I mean, they both had similar people giving out the same warnings, yes, but then they literally did an op-ed about how the 2020 election, pretty much everything was under control. Everything was under control. Don't worry, it's perfectly fine. This was done.
Sure, from their perspective, everything was under control.
And this was done on Monday, November 23rd, 2020. So it was after Biden had won the election. Why foreign election interference fizzled in 2020 by Scott Jasper. And lady talks about how, during the presidential campaign ramped up in August, U.S. intelligence agencies warned that Russia, China, and Iran would attempt to interfere in elections using disinformation campaigns or potentially disrupting the voting process. And they talk about how the federal agencies acted fast and swift by advisement from the Atlantic Council and how they were able to stop the interference like the 2016 election that occurred by Russia and other foreign entities to influence the election of Donald Trump.
Well, let us all thank our lucky stars for the Atlantic Council, folks.
oh, that's all a selection. None of this really matters. This is this people patting each other on the back, huh?
Absolutely. Yes. How much influence is the council going to have on Biden?
A tremendous amount.
So I take it the pipeline is continued with the foreign policy.
It is not going to stop.
Huh?
No. They speak extremely highly about Biden, from what I could tell. Nothing to see here. No one interfered. The 2020 election was completely on the up and up, as all elections are, except for the 2016 election, because that pesky Trump got elected because of Russia, fanning into that narrative. But yeah, I mean, it's business as usual. I mean, again, Amos Hochstein, Naftagaz, Hunter Biden. They haven't put out anything really negatively against Biden that I was able to search and find. Biden's cabinet isn't completely put into place yet, so I can't say whom is from the Atlantic Council that's part of his cabinet yet, because it hasn't come to fruition. But yeah, I think they're going to have their hands in the pie of the Biden administration, probably more than they did with Trump, and maybe even more than they did with Obama. I would assume that.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely seems like they were arguably closer to Hillary Clinton, I think, than Obama, especially with like Holbrooke there, who, as I understand it, was Hillary Clinton's mentor on foreign policy or something to that effect. So
yes.
Yeah, it should be very interesting, certainly. All right. So to wrap up, what is your take on the longer telegram recently issued by the Atlantic Council? I should, to put this in perspective for you guys, that's a reference to the long telegram sent by George Kennan. We mentioned him earlier as part of that wise man clique that had so much sway over American foreign policy throughout the middle of the 20th century. He allegedly issued this telegram in Moscow in 1946, warning about the rise of Soviet power and its threat to the United States. And this is kind of pointed to as the moment of the ideology of containment being exposed by a major figure in the U.S. foreign policy establishment. And of course, containment was one of the three major foreign policies advocated during the Cold War, along with détente and rollback. Containment was seen by many within the foreign policy establishment as the sensible middle ground, trying to hold the Soviet Union within its current boundaries, as opposed to détente, where you essentially tried to go with mutual coexistence, which was favored by the business community, and rollback, which was the policy of the secret right, where we militantly tried to destroy the Soviet Union, and that was implemented and enforced during the Reagan years. So, they're calling this the longer telegram, and it sure seems to be advocating a more militant line with China this time around. That is now.
Oh yeah.
Uh, so, what's your take on this thing?
Are you ready for us to have a new USSR? And it's called China. You ready for Cold War II?
That's what I was getting the sense of.
Electro Boogaloo.
Mhm.
Look, we got Antony Blinken. I was surprised that Biden and Blinken are now like, we're going to hold China accountable when we know good old Beijing Joe has got numerous connections to China and get payoffs. Hunter Biden as well. So I was just shocked. I wasn't expecting that. I expect him to be a little hard on Russia, right? And I expect them to maybe snub BB, which they supposedly have done so far. Supposedly, but I doubt it. I'm a proud Zionist, Joe Biden. You know. So, but them to be hard on Russia, China, and to appear to go harder on China than Donald John Trump and the Council for National Policy, I'm shocked. I didn't see this coming. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I should have seen this coming. I didn't. So let's look at a few of the core domestic tasks for the the longer telegram, should I say? Longer telegram. So we have reversing declining investments in critical national economic infrastructure, including next generation 5G mobile systems. The Trump administration was trying to do that. Reversing declining public investment in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education, universities, and basic scientific research. What? Shift from the arts that the globalists have been pushing for decades into STEM? Wait, what? Insurance, the United States remains a global leader in major categories of technological innovation, including AI. Well, you sold all our technology to China and Russia and Israel and other countries. So what now? We're all of a sudden supposed to come up to return like a boxer that's just got beaten down. It's the last round. Like we're supposed to come back now. This is what what is this, man? I expect a lot of these talking points, political consensus on the future nature and scale of immigration to the United States from China. What? Do you expect this stuff to come out of a globalist world order?
Well, frankly, no, I'm not that surprised by it. It's said all along. One of the major reasons why Trump was put in place in the 2016 election in favor of Hillary Clinton was to reorient U.S. foreign policy towards China.
Yeah.
I definitely think that there was a legitimate dispute within the establishment over Russia or China, and I do think that the anti-China faction has clearly won out, if this is any indication. I do think that they're going to continue paying lip service to Russia for a while, especially whenever they want to bring out the Trump boogeyman. But
when you're reading this, it looks like the best of both sides wrote it, and they came to agreement. They're like, okay, you get this. you get this, you get, tougher, military and economic set, tougher military,
Yeah, well, that's, I mean,
preventing China from crossing red lines and,
I mean, if anything, that's, to me, that was the most surprising aspect of it. I mean, I kind of can, I figured that the Biden administration would probably continue the economic policies Trump had initiated against China and maybe even ramp them up a little bit. But I was really surprised by, what the Atlantic Council seems to be advocating here, which was essentially having the military take a much more direct role in containing China.
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
I mean, another interesting aspect about this too was the Taiwanese ambassador being invited to Biden's inauguration. I believe that's the first time they've had a member of Taiwan at the inauguration since what, 1980 or something like that. Which seems to indicate that again, we're going to continue Trump's policy of reorienting our foreign policy with Taiwan.
Which
Uh,
some of the CMPs wanted for
mhm.
since inception.
Building them up again as another as a military power again in Asia, along with Japan and what have you. So yeah, I mean, I can't say that I'm really surprised by this. I mean, I do think that was a big part of Trump, getting into office in the first place was to take the country towards an anti-China stance,
Hmm.
which it certainly seems like that he has managed now. And yeah, Biden.
Hand off the baton to the Atlantic Council.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, and it's also basically provided, I mean, great cover for Biden to, effectively move even further right towards China than Trump was, because now he can just blame everything on China. Well, I mean, Trump had already just, he burned the or poisoned the well with China already. There's nothing we could have done. We had to continue, it's just the way it was. So yeah.
Do you think they're really going to do anything as far as China is concerned, or do you think it's just going to be
God, I
to
hope
provide
not.
cover as they continue selling us out?
I mean, I do think that they are going to take a more militant stance towards China and I mean, legitimately try to contain them because I mean, I do think that, this was another issue that I think some of the people within the foreign policy establishment, I mean, the global elite have started to realize that China does realistically expect to take on a much more prominent role in the management of the world order, which I think certain people have a real issue with. And obviously, also, China has its own, I think, imperial ambitions as well, which is something that many people within the neoliberal order are maybe now just waking up to.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I do think it's a bit naive to assume that China simply just wants to play second fiddle in, a geopolitical structure that was, predominantly built by the West to maintain their economic interests effectively. So yeah, I mean, I do think that there is a chance for some real pushback here. Um, the one factor, though, I do think is the Silicon Valley card here, which
Mm-hmm.
is kind of a wild one because I mean, Silicon Valley is obviously so dependent on China. That was one of their biggest beasts was Trump. A lot of them probably aren't going to be happy about this, but on the flip side of the coin, it doesn't seem like they have quite the access to Biden that they did under Obama, where they effectively had the run of the White House. What's your take? Do you see that maybe being an issue?
Yeah, I could see that. I could see that. Yeah, Hollywood too as well.
Yeah, but I don't think Hollywood has been taking it on the chin for a while now. And I mean, Corona has really, yeah, I don't know if we're ever going to see Hollywood recover the way that it was, when we were growing up. I mean, especially with the theaters and people
Yeah,
waiting and, standing in line in front of the theater to see Jurassic Park back in the day and that type of stuff. You know, a lot of that is probably never coming back. You're going to see, I think, just more and more of the money going towards Netflix and that type of thing,
yeah,
and possibly even China as well. Honestly, but see, and that's another issue because I mean, there is a lot of money from China flowing into Hollywood, which is also why I think there's a good possibility that it could be continuously under assault, even with Biden in office. I mean, there is quite possibly a bit of a geopolitical implication behind some of the stuff with Me Too and the Weinsteins and that type of thing.
yeah, yeah. I could see that too.
But yeah, I mean, certainly, when we look at this with the Atlantic Council, I mean, it really does seem like they have been really driving the DoD at least a good chunk of upper management for at least the last 15 years or so. And I mean, also a lot of other crucial spots like national security advisor, to some extent, the CIA director, key officials in the secretary or the Department of State. So yeah, I mean, this is really an organization you guys need to pay attention to. If you want to get a bit of a tell as to where our foreign policy is headed, I think. And
Yeah.
that's why I think, you do have to take Biden's anti-China rhetoric seriously, because I mean, if a body like the Atlantic Council is also, coming out with it, it's a good indication that this is actually what they're planning on taking it.
Yeah, very much so.
John, did you have anything else to add, sir?
No, we need more eyes on the Atlantic Council. We need more people researching it.
Yeah, I mean, there's just not a lot out there. Something that we both found out while we were putting this podcast together.
Yeah, pretty much most of the information about the Atlantic Council is put forth by the Atlantic Council themselves.
Yeah, that is interesting. It's more of that open source intelligence for you. Gotta love
Yes.
it. All right, John, it's always a pleasure, sir. Thank you so much for dropping by for this. And I hope all you guys listening have enjoyed it as well. And as always, good night and good luck to you all.